I'm the president and CEO of NeighborWorks, Northeastern Pennsylvania. We are thrilled you are here. We're thrilled there's so many representatives of municipalities and cities in one place to talk about this really important issue. NeighborWorks Northeastern Pennsylvania has been around for over 35 years, and our focus has been on housing and neighborhood revitalization issues. And when we started talking about this issue of blight in our community, we wanted to address it not just from a focused small scale. We recognized that we really needed to address this issue really from a greater and holistic approach. And so as over the last couple of years, we've started having conversations with other leaders and partners, including George Kelly at Lackawanna County, with the Land Bank, including Terry Ooms with the Institute for Public Policy and Economic Development. A couple years ago, we worked with the Institute to do a study about blight. It was the first time anybody really looked at this issue, again, holistically, and the cost of that issue to our community. And what we found was pretty unnerving when we looked at all those numbers. And so George and colleagues at the county really took the lead in trying to figure out a way that we could focus on addressing this. The commissioners deserve a lot of credit for investing in one of the tools that's really necessary to fight blight, and that's the Land Bank, which George and his team have done a great job getting up and running. We came into the mix because we do this work, we care about our communities, we're focused on home ownership, we focus on neighborhood revitalization, as I mentioned, and we wanted to find a way to facilitate kind of this larger effort. And it's been a great 6-8 months now since we kicked this whole thing off. Something like this takes a lot of effort and energy from a lot of different people, and we'd be remiss if we didn't mention some of the folks who came to the table to really pull this together and really present the type of quality study that you're going to see tonight with some recommendations that really we're hoping all of the folks here in this room will help us implement to make these changes in our neighborhoods. So again, I mentioned George and the county commissioners for all their great work, Ralph Pappas as well, just from a staff standpoint at the county, we really appreciate it. The Scranton Area Foundation, Scranton Area Community Foundation supported this report. They helped pay for the efforts going into this, so we really appreciate their commitment to our neighborhoods as well. I mentioned the Institute for Public Policy, the NeighborWorks Board. Michelle Bannon is here. Joe Joyce is here. Where's Joe? Thank you. They've invested in this as well. So we appreciate it. Michelle's part of the task force as well. The task force members, if you wouldn't mind just raising your hand real quick, all the folks who are on the task force for this, thank you for all of your work over the last number of months to really roll up your sleeves, take all the information, the great information that came from the surveys from the municipalities, digest the information that came out of the public meetings and turn it into some really quality recommendations. Todd Poosley from my staff did a great job in facilitating all this. And then the man of the hour, Chris Galata, who you'll be hearing a lot from tonight, who brought his expertise from doing this in a lot of different communities across the state and helped us out with getting to this point. So we're really excited to hear about the final draft of this plan. We're excited about implementing this and what it could mean to our community. I'm going to ask George to say a few words on behalf of the county as well and the Land Bank, and we'll turn it over to Chris to lead you through the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Good evening, everybody. Public-private partnership. It's been a great partnership. Jesse and his team has been a great partner working on this project, as well as other projects, affordable housing projects. So we worked well together, and we wanted to kick off this program. I thought, who else better to turn to partner with Jesse and Todd and the team? You've done a great job with this. Thank you so much for your work. Really working hard to improve the quality of life in all our communities. I mentioned the Land Bank. The Land Bank's been operational for about 1.5 years. I had the pleasure of being one of the founding members of the Land Bank, and myself and Larry West from Senator Blake's office drove around from town to town throughout Pennsylvania, visiting land banks that were operational, only a handful. We talked to Chris Galata, who's one of the leading experts in redevelopment and land banks and blight, and it's something that we said we really needed to do. So we were blessed that Senator Blake and the state reps funded the land bank with a gambling grant, $165,000. And then we went back to the well and asked Senator Blake, Marty Flynn, and the other state reps to say, guys, we have an issue with blight in Lackawanna County. The land bank is only one great tool, but it's widespread and we need to take a better approach. They funded us with a second gambling grant to make this all possible. So it was another $65,000 that we received through the CFA, through the LSA program to make this happen. And as a county, we're real good at getting money in, but I look to say, what's the best way of deploying that money? And that's why we turned to Jesse and to Chris to make this program happen. I want to thank all the volunteers. We did 4 town hall meetings. A lot of people came out, voiced their concerns. The task force worked hard, gave up some of their free time in the evenings to meet together to actually have this presentation today. And they should be commended that people have all been part of this and have been contributing towards this, all to make our communities better. The land bank, we're operational for about a year and a half now. It's been in formation for about 3 years in Scranton. We started there, and we're on about our 80th property right now that we're selling. We work with the tax claim office. Joe is here, and he does an excellent job of working with us, partnering, and he makes life real easy to do business with. One of the biggest challenges we hear from other land banks is working with tax claim is tough. It's very tough. In this, it hasn't been. It's been a really great partnership there. It really helped us be very successful. We have now expanded the land bank. Al, you've decided, or the council and you have decided to join the land bank.
As well as Lakeland.
Lakeland School has just passed the resolution. Next Wednesday, the Lackawanna County Commissioners will be asked to pass the final resolution for the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement. And on the second Friday of December, we'll have the land bank just fully authorize that, and then you'll be an operating partner in the land bank. We appreciate you joining. We have Feld Township. You see representatives here from Feld Township that they're on too. They just joined about 2-3 weeks ago. We had all the different taxing bodies agree to participate in this, and we're working on demolishing one of their problem properties, a long-standing property that they've had some challenges to take care of. So we're going to partner with them with that, and I know that's one of your priorities. You have a couple of problem properties. So we are in conversations right now with Old Forge. Council's on board. I have to meet the school board. We have also met with Dunmore, and Dunmore is on board too. So I want to see this as an ever-expanding tool, a very powerful tool that has benefits. But when we're talking about blight and some of the things that Chris is going to talk about tonight, you don't have to join the land bank to be part of it. The land bank just has a lot of benefits that can help. So if you're interested in that, you can see me or Ralph Pappas. He does all the work. He makes us all look good. Works nonstop every day. People call him up. I want to buy that lousy piece of property that's so ugly nobody else would ever want, and he makes that happen. So he's a miracle worker. So if you're interested in the land bank, come on, see me, see Ralph. We'd love to have you join. And it only costs $1 a year if you're a municipality, and that's through the generosity of the senator and the state reps with the gambling grants, and also with the board of the land bank that wants to make sure that it isn't a financial hurdle. It's just a matter of, do you want to do business? Do you want to trust the land bank to help you fight blight in the community? So that's the main toolkit that we have. We have community development block grant funds. There's entitlement money goes directly to communities. There's non-entitlement money that you can put in an application every year. There's only a handful of communities that do that. Al is leading the pack, though. He's got it down. He's got the recipe. So every time we do a non-entitlement money, Al's at the top of the list saying, George, I'm going to make it easy for you. Here's everything you need. Here's the qualifications. You don't have to do anything. Just send in the application. So everyone always says, why does Al get so much money in Mayfield? Why are they getting CDBG money? Because he's easy to do business with. So if you have projects that you may want to tackle, whether it's fighting blight, improving infrastructure, water, stormwater separation, or other type projects, definitely, I strongly encourage you to do that and to apply for that type of money. We have Act 137 money, affordable housing funds, that helps those who may not have a lot of money available, not making a lot of money. We do some emergency rehabs, keep people in the house. So that's really different items of the toolkit for fighting blight, for improving our communities. But again, today's focus is on the Blight to Bright program. Chris has done a great job of kind of shepherding or corralling cats together to make this all happen. But we want to take this further than just tonight, where we come up with our findings and say, yeah, we have a problem and here's 5 things we can do. We're going to look to do a series of workshops in conjunction with Jesse, with NeighborWorks, with Todd, with my team, to say, how do we actually work hand in hand with each municipality to help you develop the tools you need to try to get your resources. So again, we're a resource, we're a tool, we're here to help you. And what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Chris Galata, who wrote the book on Blight. So thank you much for coming tonight.
Thanks, George. Yeah, I think the turnout tonight is really superb. Thank you for coming out. I understand we were in competition with a tree lighting in Scranton where they're serving hot chocolate. So thank you for attending and given the fact that there were competing events this evening. How many municipalities are represented here tonight? If you're a municipal official, either appointed or elected, if you could raise your hand. Okay. And this is really your meeting as much as the task force's meeting, because I truly believe that with the issue of blight, that municipalities are driving the bus. There have been substantial changes to state laws in the past now 10 years that really level the playing field and give you the opportunity to deal with this issue in a much more effective way. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be any less frustrating, because my guess is this is probably the top 3 in terms of your frustrations working with blighted property owners who are basically not willing to play by the rules. But in any event, there are tools. Some of those tools are reflected in this report. So again, the purpose of the meeting is to get your feedback and your comment on the strategies that are reflected in this report. And actually, feel free to raise your hand if you do have a question. I don't mind handling questions in the middle of my presentation. One of the things I want to do first is talk about what you saw on the first slide, which is the 5-step fast-track process. This is a process that has been used throughout Pennsylvania by a number of counties and municipalities to basically develop strategies to address blight. And because of the way the process has been designed, and I actually piloted this process in 2012 in Northumberland County, it's as much an educational process as it is a planning process, because it depends very much on the people at the task force level getting up to speed on what tools are available to address blight. Some of those are statutory, some of those are local, and determining what tools or what strategies would be best for that particular jurisdiction. And the first step is to gain consensus for developing a blighted property strategy, and as George and Jesse have mentioned, that really occurred earlier this year with the commitment on the part of the land bank to move ahead with this particular blight report, arguably to provide a blueprint, if you will, for communities in the county to move ahead to address this issue of blight, which is obviously an issue here in Lackawanna County, as it is really throughout Pennsylvania because of disinvestment in the past 40 to 50 years. So that's the first step, gain that consensus, and that occurred really in the spring of 2018. Then assess the nature and extent of blight. That's the second step. So there's a step in this process that basically is designed to look at data, to talk with a lot of people, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute, get their perspectives on this issue, determine to what extent they can describe what the nature of the problem of blight is in their community, how extensive that problem is. The third step is to convene the Blight Task Force. That was done after some focus group meetings in May and June of this year. The task force met for the first time, I believe, in August. That sound right? August of this year. And then the fourth step is precisely the step that we're at this evening, to engage municipal officials. Again, my point earlier, that you are in an ideal position to help the county and nonprofit organizations address this blight, because you are given now authority under state laws to implement certain strategies that were not there for you 10 years ago. We'll talk about some of those. And then the fifth step, to identify priority steps and to implement. And the development of an action plan to implement these strategies is very much a part of this process. And by the way, this process is detailed in a publication that was published by the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, which has provided a lot of leadership on this issue of blight, and it's available on their website. And by the way, it's a process, while I'm happy to get the work, George and Jesse, it's a process that could be undertaken by a community without a consultant. In other words, it's so detailed in this report about how this process is designed to unfold that an entity that wanted to go through it on their own could do that. In fact, Armstrong County did go through it on their own, and then they brought me in to help them develop a land bank, which was an outgrowth of this process. So, the second step, assess the nature and extent of blight. George or Jesse referenced focus groups, town meetings that we had in May and June, and these were very helpful in, first of all, getting people talking about this issue. These were facilitated discussions where I asked people to talk about the nature and extent of blight in their community, how that blight is impacting their community. How do they know, I should say, how many blighted properties there are in their community? What is the definition of blight that they're using when they say they have blighted properties in their community? And basically, it was an opportunity to start the networking and the conversation that is so important with any effort, including this one. So we had 4 focus group or town meetings. One was in Scranton. That was the first one, I believe, in May. The second in Carbondale and Up Valley. The third in Down Valley, communities including Old Fords, Moosic, and Taylor. The fourth one, Mid Valley, that covered, among others, the communities of Archbald, Dixon City, and Blakely. What we learned at these focus groups was that this is a problem that is not limited to vacant properties. And while vacant properties clearly can be a problem, particularly long-term vacant properties, because they represent abandonment, they represent disinvestment, and there's really nothing good that comes from a long-term vacant property. I'm not talking about long-term, 3 years or more. During that time frame, a lot of bad things can happen. We learned that some of these problems relate to occupied properties, that there's some people on fixed incomes that simply don't have the income to maintain that property, and therefore one of the strategies, since that's the case, one of the strategies is going to have to include that particular provision. We also learned that the problem is spotty with absentee owners. In other words, in some communities, absentee owners are a problem. In other communities, not necessarily a problem. I define absentee owners, an owner who lives outside of the county, by the way. And I think when we had the municipalities provide us with surveys, which are really the fourth bullet here, that was pretty much borne out in those surveys, that absentee owners are not necessarily a problem in every community, but they are in many communities. Other highlights from those focus groups: in larger communities that have commercial districts, commercial properties were part of the blighted property problem. In other communities that were more residential, that was not the case. We found, though, when in our conversation at these town meetings, that many of the properties that are blighted have been blighted for over 3 years, which again, in my mind, that constitutes abandonment, and those are the properties that can be very expensive to address because essentially they have been abandoned. There really isn't any data we found out from these town meetings to document the size of the problem, with the exception of the Institute for Public Policy study, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But no data at the municipal level. Okay, it was more at the county level. Then we looked at what's called American Community Survey data. And we shared this information at the focus group meetings and then shared it with the task force. American Community Survey data is really the Census Bureau's best attempt to keep census information updated between the decennial censi, I guess is the word. In the old days, before you had what was called American Community Survey, which is essentially estimated or extrapolated data, you had to work with data from the latest census. It's 2018, right? So if we only had 2010 census information, a lot of that's out of date. So this is the way that the census keeps that information updated. And it is estimated data. But we looked at some data items that were included in the American Community Survey data. One was the percentage of vacant housing units. The second was housing structures built prior to 1939, so older structures, housing structures, median housing value, and one of the things I look at, a lot of consultants don't look at this, but one of the things I like to look at is the percentage of households with mortgages. So these are homeowners that are what are called cost burdened. It means they're paying more than 35% of their income toward housing costs, which includes a mortgage payment, insurance, so on and so forth. Here are some of the highlights from that American Community Survey data. First, higher percentages of vacant units in the city of Scranton, 14.2%. Dixon City had 14.8% vacant housing units. Mayfield, 12.8%. All of the other communities that we looked at in these areas were in the 6 to 10% range. By the way, the county housing vacancy figure is 12.6%. When you get vacancy rates over 10%, that indicates a housing market that is not particularly strong. Otherwise, those properties, by and large, would not be vacant. And or you have a number that are deteriorated, that are no longer habitable. Okay, so that can be a marker for blight. And as I said, Scranton, Dixon City, Mayfield, higher than the county average. The others in a pretty tight range between 6 and 10%. The number of housing units built prior to 1939, that percent, it was greater than 50% in Dunmore, Scranton, and Carbondale. All of those communities had more than 50% of their housing stock was built prior to 1939. The other communities are in the 30 to 40% range. The county's at 39.4%. So 39.4% of the housing units in the county were built prior to 1939. Why is this significant? Older housing units have what I call functional obsolescence. Back in the old days, when they would build a bedroom, sometimes you would have to get through that bedroom to get to a bathroom. It's just not the way things are today. So you have to basically address that functional obsolescence. That functional obsolescence, by the way, also has the effect of pulling down values. The other issues with a property that old is that you will have, even despite best efforts to maintain that property, you will have some issues after 80 years, like foundation issues. So let's assume for a moment that the family or all of the families that lived in that house and owned that house for 30 years did a good job making sure a roof was on that property and that the heating and plumbing systems were upgraded. The fact of the matter is, in that 80-year span, you probably have to update those heating systems, those plumbing systems, those electrical systems, not once, but several times. And so there's a tendency to have higher maintenance costs on those properties. To the extent that someone can't afford to undertake those improvements, you begin to have deferred maintenance, which causes blight. The other item that we looked at that was part of the American Community Survey data was median housing values. Median housing value, and I had to refresh my memory of this from my arithmetic class. Median is half or above that number, half below. It's not an average, but half of the sales in Lackawanna County were above $147,100. Half were below that, okay? Most of the communities were in that range, with the exception of Carbondale, their median housing value $87,000, and Scranton $104,000, okay? And sometimes this is a function of the condition of housing, but oftentimes it's also a function of the type of housing. Row houses, a lot of row houses versus detached houses. And then finally, cost burden. I explained to you a few minutes ago that I like to look at this because to the extent that a homeowner is cost burdened, paying more than 35% of their monthly income toward housing expenses, that means that there's maybe not a lot left at the end of the month for a repair, and that repair gets deferred and deferred and deferred, and a leaky roof then becomes a roof replacement, and then the question is, where do they get the money to do that? So actually in Lackawanna County, and it's kind of a good news, bad news story. The bad news is 22.7% of the households are cost burdened. These are households with a mortgage, so these are homeowners. So not quite 25%. I've seen it much higher in other counties where, in all candor, housing prices are higher, okay? But still, almost 25% are cost burdened. And so that's a kind of a red flag that at least for some households there could be difficulty in keeping their homes in good repair. Then we looked at United States Postal Service vacant address data, and this is what the Institute for Public Policy used in their report, one of the sources of funds. The United States Post Office, if you're a nonprofit or a public organization, and I guess if you ask nice, right, they will provide you with a list of vacant addresses. And presumably this is coming, I guess they're compiling this from mail that is undeliverable. That's the only thing I could think of. And in the county, Lackawanna County, there are 3,750 vacant addresses. However, in 10 communities, and the county has 40 municipalities, in just 10 communities, 92%, 10 communities have 92% of those vacant addresses. Those 10 communities, about 3,500. In rank order, Scranton has 22,083 vacant addresses, Carbondale 314, Dunmore 330. Now here's a statistic that I think is troubling because you've heard me talk about long-term vacant and abandonment. Again, the same source, United States Post Office, 53% of those 3,500 properties in those 10 communities have been vacant for 3 years or longer. So it's a long-term abandonment, which has, as I said, all sorts of bad connotations in terms of what can go wrong and how expensive it is to address that issue. So as part of this process, we also had municipalities fill out a survey. We asked them, and we had 26 municipalities out of 40, which, by the way, is an excellent return rate. When I worked in other counties, maybe I get 20, 25%. This is close to 60, maybe 70%. I didn't do the arithmetic, but Really impressive results. It tells me the municipal officials in Lackawanna County understand the importance of working with nonprofits and the county to address this problem. What we found in those surveys, so each municipality filled out a survey. In those surveys, they told us, using the state definition of blight. Remember I told you starting out that one of the things we talked about at the town meetings was what definition of blight are you using? But we actually gave them the state definition of blight in plain English. And we said, okay, well, how many structures or lots in your community are blighted? And we ended up with in excess of 100, and I didn't count them up, but it was several hundred, I think, in the final analysis. We found out from those surveys that the blighted properties are mainly structures, not lots. So buildings, not lots. We did find out, and this is based on the municipal survey, that the primary problem in terms of blighted properties, at least from the municipal perspective, was rental properties or properties that are now vacant that were formerly rental properties. The municipal officials that completed these surveys also said that these are properties that have been blighted. Many of these properties, most of these properties have been blighted for 5 years or longer. And that's significant because that tells me when you have a property that is blighted for that long, it has an effect on surrounding property values, and not to mention requiring code enforcement, fire and police to address issues that come up with regard to that property. And then finally, I think Clark Summit and Dixon City indicated in their surveys that they did have a problem with absentee landlords. We also asked the municipalities, why are properties blighted? And we got a response that I alluded to earlier. Some are on fixed incomes, so we need to be responsive to that. But the vast majority are simply owners who are neglecting their properties. I mean, to put it bluntly, there's no reason, there's no lack of financial resources on the part of those owners to maintain these properties. So it's by choice, they simply are choosing not to maintain those properties. There was some indication, I think more so in Scranton than anywhere else, that foreclosures were an issue with regard to blighted properties. And a couple of communities indicated that some of the blighted properties are due to deceased owner and the issues associated with unraveling an estate. And sometimes people don't even bother to file probate papers, and these things drag on and on and on. The next source we looked at was this the Public Policy Institute report, which I guess was for both Lackawanna and Luzerne County, correct? But I'm just sharing with you information from Lackawanna County. They found, using that post office data as well, 4,838 longer-term vacant properties. Keep in mind their study was done in 2017. Using a formula that they had devised, they determined that about 1,700 of those vacant units were blighted. Okay, so now we're starting to see a picture here. Okay, and what this data begins to do is it tells you the story, which you need to know to come up with solutions to address blight. So now we know how many properties have been are blighted. We know how many have been, how long they've been blighted. We even know, based on the survey from municipalities, I didn't share this with you, how long that owner has owned those properties. And let me tell you, in the vast majority of cases, it's not for 1 year or 2 years. This owner has owned the property for 10 years or more. By the way, this report done by the Institute talks about the impact of blight on your communities. Talked about the value of those blighted homes, those 1,693 homes, 167 million. The annual taxes on those properties, 1.4 million, many of which are tax delinquent. And probably as important as anything else, the decline in property values that surround those blighted properties, 20 million. Okay, and there have been a number of studies done that document that if you live within 150 feet of a blighted property, your values are down anywhere from 5 to 15%. And if you have multiple blighted properties within that 150-foot radius, even more. So that's how you can see reductions, long-term reductions in property values, which equates to less tax levy for municipalities and counties and school districts. Finally, we also ask municipalities to tell us, well, what are you doing to address blight now? And good news, vast majority have a property maintenance code. And one of the things that the task force discussed is the importance of having a property maintenance code that is enforced. I do see a lot of communities have property maintenance codes, but because of capacity issues, they simply don't have the staff or the money to enforce that ordinance. Sometimes that enforcement is spotty, but at least the vast majority of communities in Lackawanna County have that property maintenance code, and arguably, that's the best way to prevent blight, is to deal with it at that code violation stage. Because once it gets beyond that, it mushrooms, it snowballs. Few of the municipalities have a systematic approach to code enforcement, though. And this is not unusual. In other words, they're complaint-driven. They will send out a code inspector when they get a complaint from someone. And I will tell you that several municipalities have rental housing inspections, so that's systematic, at least insofar as rental housing is concerned. But I will tell you a number of other communities, not necessarily in Lackawanna County, do what are called sweeps, code sweeps, where they will go down a block 3 or 4 times a year and begin writing code violations. And that's the systematic approach. You're not going into the house, but 3 or 4 times a year, someone is going down a street noting trash that is not properly disposed of, overstuffed furniture and appliances that are not properly disposed of, high grass, high weeds, rotted conditions on a front step that could be a health and safety hazard, other structural issues. Maybe there is an outside stairway that is made of wood that it looks like the handrail's missing, let's say. So there's health and safety issues. So it is possible, and many communities do have these sweeps, they're called. One of the communities has implemented a permit denial ordinance. We'll talk about that as part of the strategies. And 14 have implemented a rental housing licensing ordinance, which I think is a fairly high percentage. When I saw that, I was surprised. That's a good thing, that you have rental housing licensing. Now, having said that, if you don't have a problem with rental housing and the issues associated with rental housing, police getting calls in the middle of the night, code enforcement issues, then you really don't need a rental housing licensing ordinance. But 14 of the communities that responded, 14 out of 26, do. And that's a higher percent than I've seen in other counties. So that's the information we looked at. And as I said a minute ago, it begins to tell the story about what the issues are at a community level in Lackawanna County. The third step, development of priority strategies. And I see Commissioner O'Malley, you've joined us. Do you want to jump in here and say a few words, or do you want to wait until the end? Okay, I'll keep going then. Let me stop here. Any questions on anything I've covered? This is basically the foundational information for this report that the task force looked at when they formulated strategies. Does anything I said surprise you? Question?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, I would imagine that most of these properties that we're talking about are
residential, but do you have a breakdown of what the properties are via, be it residential or commercial, industrial, et cetera?
And I'm sorry, just real quick, just for clarification, we're clear that you don't need the microphone for everyone in the room to hear you. ECTV is taping it, and just for clarification, the TV viewing audience, we'd like to be sure that the questions are heard in the TV viewing audience as well. So if you will, I might stick the mic in front of your face.
What we know is from the municipal surveys, we do know that commercial properties are a problem and industrial in Scranton and in some communities that do have central business districts. Not all of the communities that have central business districts, but many of them. I will tell you that when you look at the numbers, the number of blighted properties, the number of commercial versus residential, it doesn't come close. Having said that, commercial properties are tend to be larger, tend to have some brownfield issues, and can be major undertakings. So I don't want to, by saying, yeah, there are less of them, that doesn't mean that your job is any easier as a municipal official, because arguably it requires more resources and more effort to deal with those, and more money to deal with those properties. Any other questions? Yes?
Yes, I wonder, who has the authority to do the rental housing inspections? Who does that?
Well, municipalities enact an ordinance, and the municipality can either have an on-staff person, could be a codes official. In smaller communities, I've even seen police do it, but more so it's code officials. Or you can hire a third-party inspector. And this is what I do see in a lot of smaller communities where they hire a private firm to actually do those rental housing inspections, which actually can, from a budget standpoint, is not a bad strategy because what you do is you charge a fee for those inspections, and that fee, if you do your calculations correct as a municipality, that fee should cover the cost of that third-party inspector. So in theory, it shouldn't cost the municipality anything. Okay.
So do they need a reason to inspect it, or they can just inspect it because it's a rental property whenever they want? Is my question.
Your question, I think, is a good one. Before you implement a rental housing inspection program, I think it's always a good idea to look at data. And I think what a municipality should be doing, now they don't have to do this, having said that, I mean, they could just cut to the chase and enact an ordinance. But if I were a municipal official, I would want to look at the last 3 years of code enforcement records. I'd want to look at citations, how many of them were rental versus owner occupied. I'd want to look at some of the issues that related to rental housing, even on the police side, okay, how many calls they're getting, whether the issue involves someone on the lease or not, because one of the things you can do, short of rental housing inspections, is implement rental housing licensing. And a lot of communities kind of bundle the two, but you don't have to. You could have the licensing of rental units, which gives you really good information, contact information for a landlord in the event of an emergency. You can require in that ordinance that the landlord, if they are an absentee landlord, that they have a local agent that police or codes can call in the event of an emergency. You also can require they provide you with information on their insurance company, because there's a provision under state law that allows municipalities to receive a percentage of insurance proceeds in the event of a major fire. So you want to know who that insurance agent is. But I think you want to do a little bit of data analysis before you would cut straight to doing a rental housing inspection ordinance. And I think if you would do that, in the communities I've worked, there has been some pushback in some communities on the part of landlord associations, sometimes realtors, about that type of ordinance because it's perceived as obtrusive. Some have said, well, you're treating rental housing differently than owner-occupied. That's not a problem as long as you have a rational basis for doing that, and that rational basis is generally, you can prove that rational basis by having the data. Okay. Other questions? Good question. Okay. So I spent a lot of time on this because I wanted you to understand essentially the foundation for this report. So what we did at the first task force meeting is we shared all of this information with the task force, the information from the town hall meetings, all of these other sources that I just went over. And we talked a little bit more about the problem to make sure there was some consensus on what the problem was and what the nature and extent of the problem was. And then in the second task force meeting, we got into developing some priority strategies. Now, my approach is to group these strategies into three buckets, if you will. The first bucket is strategies that prevent blight, and those are the strategies that, if deployed in a timely way, can be very cost-effective. The second group of strategies are strategies that are designed to remediate blighted properties. This is more expensive because at that point the property is blighted. Usually your attempts to rectify the problem have failed despite repeated citations. But there are strategies that can give you leverage in that situation that a lot of municipalities may not be aware of. And then the third bucket are strategies to redevelop properties. And one of the things that I've said to the task force is, particularly if you're a community that needs to grow your tax base, and is there anyone in this group that doesn't represent a community that needs to grow its tax base? Most communities need to grow their tax base. It's not enough to demolish properties. You need to redevelop those properties. And you need to see those properties repurposed for productive uses. And yeah, it's okay to have some of those productive uses be parkland. It's okay to have some of that be other public uses, a community center, but the vast majority of the repurposing really should be with the idea of growing the tax base, getting properties back on the tax roll, which is, by the way, that's why the land bank is so important. And I will say this, your land bank is recognized as one of the most effective in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But that redevelopment purpose, that redevelopment objective, that has to be there. And a lot of communities that do a good job in addressing blight, they don't spend enough time on redeveloping those blighted properties, getting them repurposed in such a way that the tax base is growing, okay? So what we did, they had homework. The task force had some homework at the end of that first meeting. This is a publication called From Blight to Bright. This is a compendium of all strategies, all possible strategies to address blighted properties that are permitted in Pennsylvania, and some strategies that maybe aren't strategies that you need a statute, a state law to implement. We'll talk about those in a minute, because some of those are part of these strategies. And what we did is, as a group, the task force got up to speed about all of the possible strategies to address blighted properties. And to make a long story short, we went through a prioritization process at the second meeting and a consensus building process, and came up with these strategies that you're going to see in the next couple slides. First, strategies to prevent blight. The first strategy, to step up marketing of programs to preserve existing housing. Arguably, this is the most cost-effective strategy that you can have, short of enforcing a property maintenance code, because you're preserving, okay? And if you do a good job preserving something, you preserve the value of the asset, you preserve the tax base. One of the issues that I mentioned earlier was people on fixed incomes and the difficulty they have in maintaining those properties. And if they're reasonably healthy, though, the argument can be made that is the most affordable housing for them, if they're reasonably healthy, okay? And they don't need to be in a care facility, whether it's assisted living or personal living. That is the most affordable housing for them. So what we have here in Lackawanna County is a program at the county level that provides funding up to $24,999 per property for the rehabilitation of owner-occupied properties. And Scranton has a similar program, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe one of those programs also is available to preserve rental occupied housing as well. And the point here is that, and I would find this in Cumberland County, that frequently are two things. One, the vast majority of people on fixed incomes or persons with disabilities would not know about that program. So one of the things we talked about at the task force is what can we do to get the word out about the availability of these programs. And yes, that means communicating better with municipal officials. It may actually mean using social media as well, and or other forms of communication that are kind of non-traditional. And the point is to actually grow a waiting list. And then my experience as a redeveloper is once I've got a waiting list, I can compete more effectively for state funds. And there was just a funding round that opened up. Actually, the deadline was a week from Friday for a program called FAIR, Pennsylvania Housing Affordability and Rehabilitation Enhancements Act, that will provide funding for owner-occupied housing rehabilitation. And there are other programs that you can access for that purpose. Right now, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the vast majority of these programs are funded through Community Development Block Grant, maybe some home funding, both of which are federal funds. Good news, bad news story. Good news is, in this year, I think there was an uptick in those funds, but I think that's an anomaly. I mean, if you look at the trend since 2011, it's been down. So you need to grow the resources to assist people in that situation and make sure that people know about these programs. The next strategy is to have municipalities consider enacting a ticketing ordinance. So a ticketing ordinance, I guess the best way to explain this is the step that could occur before you issue a formal code citation, okay? And those of you that are involved in code enforcement know that you really need to be documenting the record to make sure if you do file that code citation, and if you don't get the cooperation of the owner, you're going to be before the magisterial district justice, and you better make sure that you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's, otherwise you're going to be wasting your time before the magisterial district justice. So it's expensive to have your first step in this process be the issuance of a code citation. A lot of communities have turned to I guess you'd call it kind of a prequel. This is a step before the issuance of a code citation where the municipality enacts a ticketing ordinance that allows the municipality to ticket for code violations. So if somebody has high grass, rather than issuing a code citation, you issue a ticket, much in the same way that you would issue a parking ticket. In fact, the municipalities that I've worked with actually, it looks a lot like a parking ticket. Now, having said that, in fairness to people who may not know what the law is, and I'm a believer that some people just are out of the loop, that they really don't know what the situation is. You want to give them a verbal warning, but if they don't take care of the problem, then you issue that ticket. Fines for that ticket could be anything you want them to be. It could be $10, could be $25. You can issue multiple tickets if you don't get compliance within a time frame. Here's the point. The communities that have issued tickets have gone to a ticketing system. They're finding they're resolving anywhere from 90 to 95% of their code issues at the ticketing stage, which means they don't have to go through the expense or the time of issuing a code citation or appearing before a district justice. Now, I will tell you, 5 to 10%, and I'll call them bad actors, people who don't play by the rules, they will not pay the tickets. So you're still going to be in front of the district justice for the 5 to 10%. But if you could focus on that 5 to 10% and get the other 90% resolved for basically next to nothing in terms of administrative time, doesn't that make sense, particularly if you have a tight municipal budget? So that's the rationale behind ticketing. Because the ticket, the fine is a fine, it's not a fee. Actually, you can take those fines and you can use that money for blight-related activities. I mean, you could put it into your general fund, but I think if you had a conversation at the municipal level about how we could recycle those fines to be useful in terms of preventing blight, maybe that's adding a couple more hours to the code enforcement officer. Maybe it's putting that money in an account where you're getting a tablet program with software, those sorts of things. So you could use it for that purpose. So ticketing, again, these are not my recommendations. These are recommendations coming out of this task force. The third is to disqualify bidders at tax sales. And just this afternoon, I had an opportunity to look at a memo from the Tax Claim Bureau director. And it appears that the Tax Claim Bureau is following state law in terms of disqualifying bidders at tax sales. They're having a bidder, and by the way, let me back up. I'm presuming that you know all about tax sales, and I probably shouldn't do that. You have an upset sale first, and if you buy the property at an upset sale, these are all properties with delinquent taxes. You're buying subject to any existing liens or mortgages. No one buys the property at that point. Then it goes to judicial sale, and you're basically buying it for what the Tax Claim Bureau costs are. All of the liens have been extinguished at that point. There are provisions in what's called RETSL, the Real Estate Tax Sale Law, that really requires that the Tax Claim Bureau make best efforts to disqualify bidders who are delinquent in taxes. That's kind of a no-brainer. Who have a revoked rental housing license, who have outstanding code violations. There's been an adjudication of a code violation. Maybe they paid the fine, but they didn't correct the code violation for 3 years. There are delinquent municipal utilities. I may be missing one in there. But what your Tax Claim Bureau does is have the bidder sign an affidavit saying they're good on all of those. And that's great, but I'll tell you, as far as it goes. There's a provision in RETSL, again, this is a state tax sale law, that allows municipalities within 15 days of that tax sale to disqualify, to petition the Court of Common Pleas to disqualify a bidder who lied on that affidavit. Okay? And to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the Tax Claim Bureau director, is that correct?
Yes.
To my knowledge, the municipalities aren't being notified who the successful bidders are the day after that bid.
No, not for the public auctions, meaning upset tax sale or judicial tax sale,
Yes.
they would not know unless they're there. Now, some municipalities do come.
Right.
But for the over-the-counter sales, the private tax sales, the repository sales, they of course would know who the bidder is.
If they're at the sale.
No, those are, we need their consent.
Right, okay.
So they would obviously know who the bidder is at those sales. But you're right, we have them sign this affidavit, you know, if they have a condemned property, if they have an unsafe property, but there is no central repository of that data. We cannot vet that in a real meaningful way. Obviously, we would know if they have delinquent taxes, but we kind of need our partners in the community
Exactly.
to give us some feedback to say, hey, I know this
Right.
bidder. This bidder, you know, has a blighted property or.
And the best way to
had a
accomplish
landlord
that,
License revoked.
because they do have, you would agree, after the fact, within 15 days of that tax sale, they have the right to petition the Court of Common Pleas. What could be done, and let me say this, you're doing more than 90% of the tax claim bureaus in Pennsylvania just by having them sign that affidavit. What could be done, an additional step, which could be very helpful, is the day after that sale, shoot out an email to all the municipalities saying these were the successful bidders. Because if they've signed that affidavit and lied, there's no other way to put it, the way to hold their feet to the fire is to send it out to the municipalities and give them the opportunity to petition a court to disqualify them at that point. It's just an additional step, okay? The point here with this strategy is people that haven't played by the rules shouldn't get more property. And I do hear, I'm not saying I've heard horror stories in Lackawanna, But I can tell you, I've heard horror stories in other communities I've worked in, that the same people that bought a property in 2014, that property is now up for the tax sale again in 2017 and 2018. So it's a prevention tool. And you do have the authority under state law to disqualify, municipalities have that ability to disqualify a bidder by petitioning a court of common pleas. But your tax claim bureau is doing everything they can in advance of that sale to hold that bidder's feet to the fire. Like I said, they're doing everything they can. One more step, and it's just a communication step, is the day after that sale, and with the beauty of email, just a matter of compiling a list of successful bidders, sending it out to all the municipalities, so they have the opportunity to disqualify a bidder by petition court.
Be happy to do that.
So, okay.
Also, we have a verification. You're signing that affidavit under penalty of perjury. So there's
Right.
there's some real teeth to it, if we can catch some of these bad actors.
Okay. All right, so those are your prevention steps. Question?
I understand the good faith there, but how are you preventing people that have multiple LLCs from purchasing a different LLC every time?
Do you have a sense of,
The affidavit that the Lackawanna County Tax Claim Bureau has covers that. So you're verifying that you don't own, you're not bidding in your name as a straw person, essentially, for maybe someone who lost a property, or you don't have any corporations that would similarly be disqualified. So that's all captured within our affidavit.
And with that, the language is, states in there, if I'm not mistaken, the language states that you are the owner or control another LLC or whatever it might be. With that language, the owner or control, does it give them an opportunity in municipalities around the state that have similar language that the person can easily say, I'm just a partner in there, I don't control it? Is that an escape for them because of that language?
well, I
around
think the
state?
language that you have in your affidavit, to the extent they have an interest in a property, as a
It
member of
says,
an
it says
LLC.
own or control.
Yeah, my understanding is the language in your affidavit probably covers that.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Right.
It would pretty much capture all of that.
In the language of saying, I own, what they have to sign says, I own or control. Can they then say, I don't control it, I'm just a partner?
Well, then your partner would be an ownership interest. So what we're trying to prevent is.
Well, I understand what you're trying to prevent, but this is,
LLC A is tax delinquent, I go and form LLC B to go participate in the tax sale. Well, you.
But I'm
you
one of
own or
5 people
control
there.
A,
Yeah,
So B would equally be disqualified.
good.
Okay, but thank you for your good work with that affidavit. I think that's a great first step, and I don't see that in a lot of jurisdictions. But I think there's this follow-up step that could really seal the deal in terms of municipal involvement, being a partner, and helping you disqualify these bad actors. So those are the prevention strategies. Then we came up with a number of remediation strategies. So remediation is when the property is already blighted. And despite the best efforts of a municipality, it's slipped into a situation where it's abandoned, it's blighted, it's causing a deterioration of property values. Back in 2008, state legislature approved something called conservatorship. And this was a tool that the task force feels could be used effectively here in Lackawanna County. Conservator does not take title to the property. It's not eminent domain. What they do under state law is they petition, if the property's vacant, I'm giving you a simplified version of this. If the property's vacant, if the owner has owned it for 12 months, they may petition the Court of Common Pleas to become the conservator. Now, this could be a municipality, could petition the court to be the conservator, and what they're doing as conservator really is developing a plan of action for addressing that property, which could include demolition, also could include rehabilitation of the property. Again, eligible conservators in this law include municipalities, could include the land bank, could include nonprofit corporations, could even include lien holders, like a bank, although I haven't seen that, or other taxing authorities like a school district or a county. Haven't seen that either. But the point is, this is being used effectively in much of Pennsylvania at this point. I couldn't have said that a couple of years ago. but really in Pennsylvania, Schuylkill County, Northumberland County, Butler County, Lawrence County, other places in between. It's gaining popularity. Why? Because these are properties that are long-term vacant. They are long-term abandoned. Despite the best efforts of the municipalities, you haven't been able to get compliance. What happens frequently with these properties, the owner, maybe you file the citation, you get an adjudication at the district justice level, they pay the fine, nothing happens in terms of the repairs. And that's why you do need, by the way, to file these citations, even though you may not be getting much satisfaction in doing so. Maybe you get a fine. Maybe that fine is only modest, because sometimes district justices will levy more modest fines. You still want that guilty adjudication, because you need that. When you go to the Court of Common Pleas and say that you want to become the conservator, the judge is going to want to know that you were able to get guilty adjudications against that owner. So what happens from there? The court approves the petition. The conservator goes in, either tears the property down, repairs the property. If the owner doesn't reimburse the conservator, you petition the court to sell the property. Property is sold to another owner, could be a benevolent organization, like a nonprofit. But if you're looking for end games, and I've talked to enough municipal officials in the last, well, since I've been doing this, that there's a level of frustration there. If you're looking for an end game, remember I told you a few minutes ago that these blighted properties, when we looked at that survey, they were blighted 5-10 years. There's expense associated with dealing with those properties in that 5 to 10 year period. If you're looking for an end game, this is one of the end games. And I will tell you that in Northumberland County, I think there's an example of this in the case study of this in the report, they had an owner, an absentee owner from New York. They filed 13 separate conservator petitions. This is Cole Township and Shamokin on the same day. And we're finally able to get control of those properties and tear them down and end essentially was a 20-year saga. So if you're looking for a way to cut to the chase, to deal with this once and for all, conservatorship is a good action, or a good strategy. The other thing we talked about is, and this is true with a lot of different community development strategies, you need more resources. You've got a land bank. Land bank has been capitalized with some of the gaming revenue, I guess. You've got some CDBG that may be going into blighted properties. But are there other sources of funds that you can utilize to expand the pot of money, to deal with blight? And I'll just share with you, there's a program called the Neighborhood Assistance Program that allows banks and corporations to contribute as a contribution to a nonprofit organization like NeighborWorks or United Neighbors, and in exchange for that, receive a 75% tax credit on their state income tax. Banks love this program because it gives them community reinvestment credits. It also helps them shelter income from state taxes, let's be honest. Just in the last month, the amount of credits doubled in Pennsylvania. The legislature went from said we're going to go from 18 million in credits statewide to 36 million. So now's the time to look at growing the pot of money for demolition, and it also could be restoration or repair of blighted properties. Wouldn't have to be demolition. And again, the hook here is the 75% credit on the state corporate income tax for those donors. Now it does have to be a private concern because they're the only ones that can use the state tax credits. Another program just recently approved in Northumberland County, $750,000 under a program called Redevelopment Capital Assistance. Again, primarily for the repair, demolition, and redevelopment of blighted properties. It's something George and I talked about, and I, in all candor, I was pleasantly surprised that there was the willingness to fund that type of activity. I think the key is being able to show that at the end of the day, you have plans on how these properties get repurposed, and in most cases, that results in an increase in your tax base. So I think there's a way to make that connection. Other resources to expand the pot of money that you need, because I know resources are always an issue, the pot of money you need to address this problem. And there's a description in the report of some of these other sources. This last one under remediation, at least on this slide, is municipalities may enact permanent denial and asset encumbrance. Back in 2010, state law was passed that allows municipalities to place a lien against all real estate and personal assets of an individual when that municipality has incurred expenses to address a serious code violation. So let's say there's a property at 123 Main Street, and that municipality, despite repeated efforts and judgments at the magisterial district court level, they had to go in and board the property up, the municipality. It's typically a $1,500, $2,000 expense because it is a serious code violation, because it can be an attractive nuisance for kids, problem with drugs, all sorts of things. You can put that lien not only against that property at 123 Main Street, but any other real estate owned by that individual in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Okay. Now, one of the issues that I hope the legislature is going to work on, it has to be titled identically. So if they want to put a lien on a property in Luzerne County, the titling of that property has to be identical to the way that property is titled in Lackawanna County. And I know the legislature understands, particularly with LLCs, that could be strengthened, that particular law in that respect. And I think that's going to be an initiative of some groups to see if the legislature is willing to address what I think is a loophole, but still a good law, still a good law. The permit denial, again, someone that has been convicted of a serious code violation. State law allows, and they have not addressed that problem, state law allows you to deny a permit, such as a rental housing license in that situation. So again, you're looking for leverage. These strategies give you leverage to address those owners that really haven't played by the rules. So to the extent that they have essentially decided not to cooperate with you, you can deny a rental housing license in case of a serious violation. Redevelopment strategies. We talked about enacting programs to incentivize private investment. So you heard me talk a minute ago about how do we take these blighted properties, whether it's a lot or a structure, and get it back to productive use. And Land Bank is doing some of that now. But there are some tools available through state law. A lot of you are familiar with something called LERTA, Local Economic Revitalization Tax Assistance, which allows you to phase in taxes on improvements. A companion law that is not nearly as widely known allows you to do the same thing in residential neighborhoods where there are deteriorated properties. And I really recommend this to boroughs and townships that have unincorporated villages, because what you see is, and I see this a lot, an interest on the part of particularly younger households who want to buy in your communities because the values there are lower. In other words, they kind of match up with as entry-level housing given their resources. But a lot of them, in order to really live in your community, they need maybe a second bathroom. That's another issue with some of these functionally obsolete properties. They have one bathroom. For a younger household looking to grow a family, they need the second bathroom, or at least a half bathroom. They may need another bedroom. A lot of these houses that are over 80 years old are 2-bedroom, not 3. Other issues. So what this allows you to do is essentially phase in taxes on improvements. You still collect the same amount of taxes you were getting before, but you're phasing in taxes on improvements. Could be over a 10-year period, but I'd like to see it done over 3 years. I think that's probably all you need to do in terms of an exemption schedule. And then finally, develop an inventory of developable sites and market sites to developers. This is basically a strategy. Again, it's not a statute that allows you to do this. You can do this. It's just a matter of putting into place a system, if you will, in which municipalities are thinking about what properties can be repurposed, and really looking at really good candidates for repurposing that with a partnership with the land bank and economic development organizations and other community development agencies like nonprofits could be repurposed. I'm not going to say quickly, but sooner if everyone is working together to market those properties to prospective developers. And this is where you have these commercial properties that can be difficult depending on the size of the property. Yes, it's a commercial property, but there may be a market for the redevelopment of that property. In a municipality, a program was developed where municipalities maybe identified 1 or 2 properties in each municipality that they would like to see repurposed or redeveloped in the next 5 years, and essentially have a consortium of organizations working together to make that happen. That's essentially what we're saying. And let's develop that inventory of sites that are good prospects for redevelopment. And not all properties are good prospects for redevelopment because of their location, because of their size, could be some other issues, but some are, and that's where you want to put your efforts. The 4th step, engage municipal officials. That's what we're doing tonight. So there are a couple of these tools, strategies, that require a municipal ordinance, a ticketing ordinance, a permit denial ordinance. You don't need a ordinance for conservatorship, an ordinance to phase in taxes on improvements. So we actually have sample copies of those ordinances for you tonight. And Todd, I think you have Word versions of those. So anyone would like a Word version? So the whole idea is for you to walk out of this room with some sample ordinances that may or may not make sense for your municipality. And if they don't implement them. If they do, you've got a sample ordinance. But basically, that's what tonight's meeting is about, is to talk with municipal officials, get your feedback on these strategies, make sure that you know about the availability of these sample ordinances, and hopefully you pick those up when you come in. We've talked about these other issues about how we can strengthen the process for disqualifying owners. We've talked about the communication, cooperation between funders and municipalities in terms of increasing the number of people on fixed incomes with the objective of preserving existing housing. We've talked about options for expanding funding for demolition and the feasibility of developing an inventory of sites. The 5th step, again, in this process is to develop an action plan and implement. And when this is implemented, when this plan gets approved in other counties, I'm not sure what your approach is going to be here, whether you have the land bank board approve this or what, then a task, not a task force, an action team is convened in that county to basically look at these strategies. And there's actually a chart in the 5-step plan document that is an action plan chart that lists the strategy, what tasks are associated with the implementation of that strategy, what the time frame is for the implementation of that strategy, what lead organization is responsible for that, and how do we measure success, and also what resources may be necessary to implement that strategy. And these action team meetings are being held in counties on about 3 times a year in some counties, just to get people in the room to kind of monitor progress being made in implementing it, but also look at the other thing they're doing is looking at some of these properties that are good candidates for redevelopment. The action team is taking responsibility for that. So let me wrap up, and I'll be interested in any feedback you have on this. You've heard me use the term that municipalities are driving the bus. One of the things that we hope will come out of this effort is that municipalities will see the opportunity to address this problem of blighted properties whereas before maybe you didn't see this as an opportunity, you didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, part of the purpose of this exercise is to show municipalities there is light at the end of the tunnel. There's some things you can do that you may not be doing now that can make a real difference. And the thought is, by providing municipalities information on different options, it's hoped that you'll implement strategies that will be most effective in your community. Like anything else, this is a team effort. And where this is working, everybody's pulling in the same direction. Municipalities, school districts, the county, nonprofits, everybody is pulling in the same direction. There's a game plan. The whole purpose of this effort is to develop that blueprint, that game plan, so everybody pulls in the same direction. And hopefully, as a municipality, again, you feel encouraged. I mean, the whole point of this effort is to give you some encouragement that there are some things you can do to end this cycle of blight and abandonment. So let me stop there. Questions, comments, concerns? And then Commissioner, I want to make sure you get up here to say a few words as well. Let me ask a question. Our municipalities that are represented here, are one of these ordinances, in your opinion, could one of these make sense in your municipality that we talked about tonight? Could one of these strategies make sense that we've talked about?
Well, Chris, first of all, I'm from, is this working, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, let me get any feedback.
It's only TV.
Oh, hi, Mark. Excuse me. My name is Wayne Evans from Scranton City Council. We have an existing quality of life ordinance, and we've talked about this in the task force meetings. And quite frankly, it's not working. You mentioned before, some cities are getting, or towns are getting 90% right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Our plan basically is doing about 25% collections, from what I could gather.
Mm-hmm.
One of our problems is all the fines are too high, so they've automatically pushed it into citation mode versus a ticket mode. So, plus we have 29 different items on our ticket. So it's destined to be failure right off the bat. So we're going to take a look at what you've shown tonight, and we're going to revamp that. Our plan is to convene City Council in February after we get back from our December recess, and take all the ideas that we've signed up for, and take that, have our own Blight work session, and implement. Because at the end of the day, I mean, this is certainly a comprehensive look at Blight, which is something we haven't done before. So on the very surface of that, it's innovative. So what we want to do, and innovation, by the way, is only creative ideas implemented. So if we don't implement them, they're not creative and they're not innovative. So our plan is to meet again in February and get a plan to implement. So hopefully you'll be along for the ride as well, because we're going to ask you for help, maybe even attend one of our work sessions when we do that, if that's possible. But there's 3 or 4 items here that the quality of life ticket we're going to revamp. The issue with the tax claim office.
And we mentioned quality of life, you're talking about a ticketing ordinance.
Ticketing ordinance,
Quality of
right,
life
exactly.
ticketing
Quality of life
ordinance.
ticketing ordinance. The issue with the tax claim office sounds like it's in hand, but with the next step involved, we'll definitely get involved with that. I'm very interested in conservatorship, because conservatorship is something that we're seeing too many of our houses in Scranton condemned and then just left empty and vacant with no plan, and many of them can be rehabbed, but they're destined for demolition. And when we put that condemnation sticker on our houses in Scranton, we've basically condemned that property to death. And we want to find a way to take it beyond that, to get those houses rehabbed back on the tax roll. So we have quite a few ideas that we saw here tonight and through the task force meetings that we're going to implement.
Yeah. Anyone else? Anything else, something resonate tonight, or question, comment, concern? Yes?
I just have a logistical question. There were a number of references to reports tonight, tools and things of that sort. Is there a repository of these materials for municipalities where we can gain access to the reports that you mentioned and the other documents?
It's a great question. Is it your intention, either the Land Bank or NeighborWorks, to put the report up on your website?
Yeah.
Okay. So part of the answer, the Blight report makes reference to all of these foundational documents that we talked about tonight. Having said that, if you want to read the full measuring the impact report that was done by the Institute, I think probably you could put a link on your site to access that. The rest of it, American Community Survey data, that's in the report. That census, extrapolated census data, that's in the report. And you'll see the data for each municipality in that region. And you can see how your community compares to another community in that particular region, how it compares to the county and the state, okay, because the charts have all of that information. The municipal surveys, again, a good summary of those is in the report by municipality. You can see how they answered the questions, how each municipality answered the questions about the number of blighted properties, whether they're structures, how long they've been blighted, how long has the current owner owned that property, other characteristics. I mean, you can't begin to deal with blight unless you know the characteristics of these properties. Then you can begin to formulate strategies, which is what this has been all about. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm.
Chris, just real quick, if everybody makes sure they put their email address on here, we'll send out a follow-up email to everybody that's on this list with a link to anything we've referred to tonight. So you'll make sure you have all the information that we talked about.
Tom?
Would the Blight to Bright book that you have, is that something, I've found it to be a great read. I just love it. Is that something that could be available for everyone?
I think that NeighborWorks or the Land Bank, you could have a link to this. It is available through what's called the Blight to Bright Library. So if you Google Blight to Bright Library, this report is on that site, as is the process, the 5-step fast track process. That report is also on that site. Is there anything I got into tonight that maybe rubbed you the wrong way? You said to yourself, well, it's not really, that's not the way it is. Yes, Michelle.
During your presentation, you spoke several times about the property maintenance code.
Mm-hmm.
And you discussed how you developed a property maintenance light.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could share that with us, because it's very cumbersome, the regular version of it.
Yeah. Yes. Did I give you the light version of the property maintenance code? Yeah, so I'll need to get that to Todd. But to answer your question, Michelle, one of the things I found, and let me preface what I'm about to say by saying that the International Property Maintenance Code is a wonderful property maintenance code. But it's 23 pages long. And if you have a relatively small staff and a limited budget for code enforcement, it is difficult to enforce that ordinance in its totality. And so what I developed working with a solicitor of the Redevelopment Authority up in McKean County, the northern tier, is a light version of a property maintenance ordinance that's 5 pages long that really deals with major health and safety issues. And we've seen a lot of smaller municipalities, smaller boroughs, not all of them small, but we've seen boroughs and townships looking at this as an alternative to the International Property Maintenance Code because it doesn't take as many resources to enforce. So we can get that out to you as well because we have your email addresses, and I'll make sure I get that to you. I know you had asked for that before, so that's my bad. Sorry about that. Other comments? Anything else, again, kind of rub you the wrong way where that's not true? Some of the conclusions we came to in the report with regard to the data, the analysis that underlies all of these strategies? Any other comments? again, thank you for your time. I'm going to have the commissioner wrap up. My advice, if you're a municipality, my advice is sit down with this report. I know this is a busy time for you with budgets, and then you have reorganization meetings in January. But make a point of sitting down in February or March, by the end of the first quarter of the year, and having a conversation at your municipal level about some of these strategies that are in this report. I think that's time well spent. Because if you only implement one of these strategies and you see substantial cost savings, and more importantly, improvement in quality of life in your community, an increase in your tax base, increasing property values, reduce crime, because blighted properties are magnets for crime, it's worth it. Have that conversation at some point in the first quarter of 2019 about what strategies, what tools in this report could work for you. So with that, I'll end, and Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, Chris Collada, thank you very much. Really, ladies and gentlemen, very simple. We have 40 municipalities. We have elected officials in this room. We have citizens in this room. All of you are here because you care about your community. You want it to be better. You want it to be clean. You want it to be perfect. Costs money. We understand that. This opportunity that Chris brought to us, I think that this absolutely is something you guys could hopefully use, each and every one of your municipalities. These are tools for your toolbox. I was amazed that a lot of different municipalities actually didn't have any ordinances or different things for maybe a couch on a front porch or things such as that. But there's a lot of tools here to be had. And I think what Chris got to is conform them to the size of what your community is and what you can afford. You're not going to probably have somebody that's going to be going out 24/7 to check on this or that. Conform it to what your community is and what type of workers you have, your DPW, whoever your workers may be, your go-to people. That would be the person that would go out and enforce these different ordinances or permit issues or whatever it may be. You know, but they're here, and it's for your toolbox. And that's what this was all brought up for. And I want to also talk a little bit about the land bank. The land bank, we're at over, Ralph, what are we at, over 80 properties at this point? 81 properties. And the big thing that, and you're probably seeing it in your municipality too, and I know that absolutely Wayne Evans talks about this all the time, and I truly believe this too. We're tearing down a lot of houses. And once they're condemned, it's like you're putting them in the executioner chairs. Am I right, Wayne? And Wayne's found out a lot of things from coming to these meetings for different things that's going on in the city to either reduce what they're charging onto a fine, because, I mean, a lot of people just aren't going to pay it. And I kind of like the idea of just putting a ticket out there, just to scare them or make them be concerned. Because a lot of people, they're either not going to pay it because they don't have the money, or they don't care. So you're going to waste all your municipality's money having your officer out there, whoever it is, in front of a magistrate trying to get it done. I think that there's a lot of great opportunities with what was learned from Blight to Bright. And please take it back to your municipalities. And we're here as the land bank to try to help you in all different capacity and the county itself. The land bank, they said, we're over on 81 properties, and we're trying to keep the houses from being demolition, because we know that once most of these houses are demolished in the city of Scranton, chances are that they're not conformed lots. They're 40 by 100s. You can't build anything on it. So they either become side lots. So we're trying to make sure that we are able to get these houses back into the hands of people that are going to try to make them, put them back on the tax roll, reintroduce them to the community. Because, you know, you could have one great block and one property in the middle of that block, and it takes away from everybody else. Recently, we're on our second municipality who just signed up with us, and it was a municipality I never would have thought. And we got a couple other municipalities that are on the way in to actually sign up. You know, they're getting their school district, they're getting their city or the supervisors, whoever to sign on, and they'll come to the county last. But Fell Township signed on with us, and we went up to Fell Township. And it was the day before we were going to be voting on it. And there was one big property. There's a couple of properties that are going to sign on with us, with the land bank. But there was one property, and it was in the middle of this neighborhood. Beautiful neighborhood. Smaller houses, well-kept, some newer houses, well-kept, really, really nice community. Then there was this. I'm not sure if anybody ever saw this. This is the Phelps Township, I don't know what you call it, their school. It would have been like elementary through like 8th or 9th grade, and then they went to wherever the high school was at. Built about 100 years ago. This was in the middle of this beautiful little neighborhood. Like all trees growing up around it, asbestos siding on it, roof caving in, a fire hazard, and there was houses all surrounding it. This one issue is causing Phelps Township problems, and they signed on with us, and we're going to help them to tear this down, eliminate it, and it's on a great lot. It's a 150 by 150 lot. So I implore all of you, I'm not sure if you spoke to George Kelly or the Land Bank or to Ralph Pappas, or, you know, I mean, we have some great options here. Joe Joyce is here. I mean, we have tools within the county, and I just think if we all rely on each other, there's a lot of opportunities for us to make great things happen, each and every one of our municipalities. But the Land Bank is very, very helpful. And this next year, if everything goes right, this will be torn down, and this property will hopefully be sold by probably this time next year, if everything goes right. I'd just like to thank all of you for coming out. Being an elected official isn't easy. I know there's a lot of things that you go through at your various meetings, and it's not easy. But thank you for what you do, and thank you for coming out. And to people who are just here that are volunteers that just come out and they care about the community, thank you. And Chris, thank you very much. George Kelly, Economic Development. George, second to none. Please reach out to Lackawanna County Government. If there's something you think we can help you with, reach out to us. If there's something that you think we might be with the state, the feds, whatever, please come to us. We're going to try to do our best to do the best for each and every one of the 40 municipalities, because that's what comprises Lackawanna County, and that's who we represent. So I'd just like to thank everyone for coming out this evening. I'm hoping that we can have meetings that go on. But yeah, George, are we going to try to have a meeting a couple months from now? How's that going to? Okay, good. No, you better make sure of that. But this is another great partnership. NeighborWorks. There's a house up in German that I was at the other day, or excuse me, a few weeks ago. This house was definitely going to be demolition. They refurbished it, and hopefully, did they get a buyer yet?
Get a couple bites, not yet though.
Nice block, but this one block had one bad house on it. They refurbished it. 100-year-old house, I mean, strong structural house next to an old cemetery and a couple other houses on that block, nice block. And they brought that one block back. Everybody's houses, you know what I mean? Like, they're not losing any money on their houses. If anybody tries to sell their house now, there's a beautiful house that they refurbished. So NeighborWorks, thank you very much for being a partner and working with the Land Bank.
We appreciate it. So thank you. As we close up here, you know, Commissioner talked about that one house. I think we all can envision that one house or two or 5 or 10 in our community that need that attention. And really that's what this is about. You know, we've been on this journey for a couple years now. We're thrilled to be at the place where we can kind of present all this information. NeighborWorks, the Land Bank, others, were in a lot of ways we're the convener and the facilitator, but the implementers are in this room, and that's you. You know, you're the ones that are going to make a lot of this happen in your municipality. And as we move forward, we just want to say we're going to be here for that process too. We don't want this just to be a public meeting where we present a bunch of information and then that's it. As we move forward, as Chris mentioned, there's going to be an action team put together to really start working through and implementing some pieces of this plan. We would love continued input and support from the municipalities. We're also, as the Commissioner mentioned, here to support you as you implement these strategies in your community. We're looking at more opportunities where we can convene all the municipalities together for more education. We're also looking to be available.
You're always welcome to come here. This is your emergency service center. As long as the date's available, we can do anything we like.
Absolutely. So there'll be more opportunities. There'll be more opportunities to do this. And also, in addition, if you would like any of us to come out to your own meetings, your own work groups, we can try to make ourselves available to have those discussions as well. We don't want it to end here. We want this to be the beginning. That's the whole point of this process. So again, thank you for the time that you spent with us tonight. We'll be here to take any questions afterwards, but we'll see you hopefully as we move this process forward. Good night.